Hello and welcome to our webinar today, provided for you from Fortra. Topic today is IBM data encryption, the what, why, and how. So, this is an interesting topic, and I'm sure my colleague here, George, is going to have a lot to weigh in there on the importance of data and understanding it. But first, I want to talk a little bit about Fortra itself. So Fortra is really your cybersecurity ally, and we really have worked hard to provide best-in-class cybersecurity efforts for all of you. Presenters today, my name is Sandi Moore. I'm Senior Solutions Engineer here at Fortra. I've been working on IBM for over 20 years now and primarily focused in the last 10 on cybersecurity, and really have enjoyed working with customers in many capacities, but cybersecurity is really where my happy spot is. And today I've got here with me my colleague George Hibler. George, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. So I'm George Hibler. I'm a solutions architect with Fortra, primarily in the data protection division that we have. So that encompasses DLP, classification, and encryption or digital rights management. I do a lot of work in the federal space, in the classified areas, and unclass as well with CUI, as well as commercial customers. I've got some pretty large financial institutions. So hopefully I can bring some color and background as towards what those folks are doing in identifying the data, identifying the sensitivity of it, and why it's important. So look forward to presenting.
Awesome. Thanks, George. I think you're going to bring a lot of good information to the table for us today. A little bit back to Fortra here. Just want to give you some statistics here at a glance. Fortra has grown over the years. We've got almost 3,000 team members across over 20 countries around the world. And we service customers in virtually every industry. And it's a very widespread. As George mentioned, he works a lot with the federal government, playing a big part in assisting industries secure their servers, secure their environment, secure their data. So really taking that holistic approach. We're industry recognized through many different resources and have continued to build our portfolio and to further our investment in security. The solution suites cover the gamut. It runs through any potential security requirements you have, and we've really worked hard to build out this offering so that you've got that full solution suite. Today, we're really focused, of course, we've got George here with our data classification up there in the top left and their data protection. And I'm representing here the IBM solution, specifically the cybersecurity and encryption. So we'll get going here, but first I want to kind of circle back to the IBM security investment that Fortra has made. This is foundational for the company and represented by our premier security products, which are globally recognized as power tech products. So this security suite has been out in available for customers for many, many years, multiple decades. We also provide comprehensive IBM and AIX security services. And we also maintain a membership in the PCI Security Standards Council, so ensuring that we are on top of and understanding what the latest requirements are and having a depth of understanding of the security standards. We also publish an annual State of IBM security study, and this is globally recognized as the premier provider of information about the security security posture on most IBM systems. And it really has helped us to understand and helped others understand really what the focus needs to be on security in IBM. So with that said, let's talk about data classification. So I think understanding the data and how to and the classification of it is a really important part of understanding where that data sits on our core servers. And with IBM very often being the core server, we really have to start thinking about what that means. So I'm actually going to go ahead and give control here to George so that he can walk us through data classification and really get a better understanding for it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sandi. Let's see if I've got control. I'll try to click.
And there you go.
Okay. And as these things usually go, I do not have control.
All right, we'll make it go one more time. There you go.
All right, we'll try it again.
Technology bites us every time.
There we go. What is data classification? I think I did that.
You sure did.
Okay, good stuff. So when I work with customers, some of the things that we want to understand, and I think this illustrates it pretty good, is our data, our files and everything don't exist in a bubble. It's not a self-contained universe, and that data is always on the move. It's being shared. It's leaving the organization. It's being shared internally, and there's needs to protect that data. So why would we want to do that? Well, we look at some of the statistics that I was able to pull up. Is like 60% of employees exchange data with 10 or more people daily. And if you multiply that out, particularly with large organizations, that's a lot of data that's being exchanged and moved and things around within your company and even outside your company. What you may not know is 20% of employees have copied corporate information into personal apps. I mean, I'm probably as guilty as the next person on my phone or even on some of my personal laptops when I'm traveling or things like that. 46% of employees allow others to borrow their phone. I'm not so sure I would do that, but I guess that happens. And 85% of companies don't approve the use of consumer-grade cloud file shares. I need to get a file to a customer. It has to go out and they can't access our corporate share, or they don't have some of our Fortra products for secure file sharing. We tend to use maybe our personal Dropbox or things like that to share data. Not a good thing. And 58% of employees use them anyway. So the point I'm trying to make here is data goes all over the place and it can leave your organization. And 84% of organizations have had staff-related incidents. And 81% through misuse of email. We sent something out. 49% loss or leak of confidential information. Well, that's a challenge because organizations, this is probably an old slide, $71 billion on IT security. And 93% of organizations have been breached in one way, shape, or another. We're seeing that more and more in the news every day. There's some scary ones, I think, last week where personal information got left out. So where does data classification come into the play? Well, I like to use the analogy of a UPS or a FedEx box. How do we know what's inside those boxes, inside a file, for argument's sake? Well, in the shipping world, they put visual markings on it, and they put machine readable language labels on those boxes, so we know whether it's fragile, how that box should be handled, and if humans aren't handling it, it's going through some automated system, then they read the machine readable components for the visual markings and for the classification. So now we've given identity to that data, and now that we know what that identity is, now we know how to protect it, and that could include how sensitive that content is. Maybe it's fragile or things like that. So there's your analogy on thinking of data as boxes. Internally within your organization, what is sensitive data? Is this sensitive data? Maybe not. Looks like phone numbers to me. If I took one number off, it might be a social security number or things like that. That in itself is not sensitive. However, if I combine that with additional pieces of information within the organization, that becomes PII. If I combine it with some health information, then it's PHI. If I combine it with some credit card information, that's PCI. So it's not just single pieces of information, but also information that's been amalgamated from multiple sources and put together that now constitutes sensitive information and should be classified and protected. Examples in the real world of information that's confidential or sensitive that gets exchanged every day. If you think about it, when accounting does a payroll run and sends that file off to ADP, your payroll processor, that's got sensitive information in it. If you look at production runs within a manufacturing company, the ordering and invoicing of all the supplies and even the product that's gone out, that's sensitive information. Within banks and things like that, spreadsheets are sensitive information because they may be intellectual property. They may have developed spreadsheets based on, doing financial model predictions and maybe using AI and things like that. All of that is confidential, and you wouldn't want that to leave your organization. So we need to think about that sensitive data. So what is data classification? It's a process of consistently categorizing that data using those visual metadata labels, putting them in a box on specific and predetermined criteria. So we know what that stuff is, and we can efficiently and appropriately protect it. Why do we need to do it? Well, there's numerous reasons. GDPR, HIPAA, HIPAA, PCI, CCPA, all those sorts of regulations around different aspects of industry, whether that be the federal side, EAR and ITAR. And then lastly, the intellectual property. Those are probably the crown jewels. We want to make sure that they don't necessarily escape out. And it helps you simplify your strategy too, instead of looking at everything and trying to determine what it is on the fly. How do we do data classification? A few key questions. What are our data types? Maybe we've got structured data. What's in there? And with structured data, inside databases and things like that, you've got to think about the reports and the files and things that are being extracted from that database. So it's got secure information, and those reports and things may be even more sensitive than the lone pieces of data that are in there. What data needs to be classified? If you're under GDPR and the right to remove and all that sort of good stuff, you know that the standard stuff, credit card information, address, name, socials, et cetera, et cetera. Where is that sensitive data? I've done scans throughout organizations where they didn't even know where a lot of the stuff was, and then when we found out where the sensitive stuff was, we could embark on a program to better contain that and protect it. And what are some examples of classification levels? Well, simplest ones would be public, internal, confidential, and restricted. Kind of an interesting thing. I worked with a few customers that the most sensitive classification level was public, and only 4 or 5 individuals in the company were allowed to mark something as public because that information was released outside of the organization. So differing priorities, and the labels may be confusing between companies, but you decide on how you identify your least sensitive stuff, even your public stuff, to your most sensitive material. How can that data be protected? Well, we do that in our data protection division here at Fortra. That's how our DLPs can work with that sensitive data, block it from going out, and our encryption products can help you control that data once it's left the organization. And lastly, who has access to that data? If you're working with the federal government, you have CUI, controlled unclassified information. That can get important as towards who's allowed to actually see that. I mentioned briefly data discovery. That is an aspect of it. You need to know where that data is and how sensitive it is. The analogy I use is, if you don't know where your sensitive data is and how sensitive it is, it's kind of like trying to be the bodyguard for the invisible man. And remember that bubble we saw in the beginning? Data was flowing around, and where was the sensitive stuff? Where were the red dots that needed to be protected? So we need to look at what's on the endpoints. It's your laptops and your work computers. What's up in the repositories, up in the network, file shares, and more importantly, what's gone out. What are you putting up in SharePoint, OneDrive, Box, Dropbox, places like that. So we aim to try and address all of those questions as we go through a data protection exercise. Long and short is, data classification is foundational. It's actually a big part of a lot of the initiatives we're seeing in zero trust and things like that. And I'm not the only guy saying this. So we look through some of the trade magazines and IT magazines and things like that. We're seeing, this has been the trend for years. IDC, it's easier to manage that data deluge if you have classification. Once you put that classification in play, now you can better protect the data that's out there. Gartner seems to, they support the same theory. You've got to have an effective data classification program, security and risk management, tasked with a classification program. Again, that's the foundation that I was talking about with zero trust. And big data is driving it. We're just generating a lot of data at the moment. And the example in the bottom left-hand corner of this slide shows us without classification. We've got CAD files, we've got personal pictures, we've got merger and acquisition information, archived press releases, emails, actually they're not even on there, earnings reports. With classification, instead of them all being classified as restricted or protected as restricted, your CAD files are internal. That's probably intellectual property. Your personal pictures, that could be public stuff. Mergers and acquisition, well, definitely that you want to keep that close to your chest. And the archived press releases, they may be public. Usually they are because they're already out there in the street. And then lastly, your earnings report. That's extremely sensitive material, particularly around quarterly reporting and federal reporting requirements. So these are things to think about. Solution is identify that data and classify it. That's where we come in. That lends to building better security around it and protecting that information in the organization and understanding where your sensitive data is going to and from. What needs protection? We mentioned this PCI data, credit card numbers. I wouldn't want my credit card numbers, name and address to be released. PII data, social security numbers, birth dates, things of that nature. That's what the bad guys use to do identity theft. Health-related information, that's highly confidential. Again, your bank account numbers, user IDs and passwords, PIN numbers, payroll information. I used that example earlier. Driver's license numbers, financial data, intellectual property, trade secrets, things of that nature. And lastly, anything that is confidential to the organization, its employees, and its customers. So foundational, particularly for going forward with zero trust modeling or complying to various standards like HIPAA and GDPR and CCPA and CUI and things like that. So foundational, folks. Any questions, we're happy to work with you. Drop stuff in the chat and we'll get back to you. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, George. And I forgot to mention at the beginning, I realized here that I didn't say, if you have questions, feel free to use the Q&A panel and we will be happy to get back to you. And if we don't have time at the end to answer your questions, we'll certainly follow up with you. I think data classification, it's fascinating and we don't realize how much data flows and how much is out there. But sometimes that data classification isn't really because you see it as a best practice. Sometimes it's because there's mandates that require data encryption. And George had mentioned a couple of them. And it's really, when we look at encryption and encrypting sensitive data, once you've classified that data, that encryption is not something that you do just because it's fun or because it's what you want to do, but sometimes there's those regulatory compliance mandates that are telling you that you have to encrypt the data. Number of them specifically call out encryption as a way to protect that sensitive data that you've identified during that data classification exercise. So GDPR, Articles 32 and 43 explicitly call out encryption. PCI DSS, that Data Security Standards Requirement 3 specifically calls out protecting that stored account data and explicitly defining encryption as a method for that, and then HIPAA as well, the encryption and decryption. So, those are the three big ones a lot of us are really aware of, but there's a lot more mandates that may be more regional and more specific to certain industries that aren't quite as well known, but can still impact businesses that they don't even realize that they fall under that mandate. The New York Department of Financial Services regulation explicitly calls out encryption. NACHA also requires encryption on those ACH transactions as well. So encrypting the data can be a really critical part of protecting that sensitive data once you've identified it. But not only regulatory compliance mandates, you may say, well, we're privately held. Well, you may have a cyber insurance policy. So there's even more reason to protect that data and start managing encryption at the database level by through meeting your cyber insurance policies. So make sure that you're reading those policies very carefully. They are explicitly calling out methods of protecting data to prevent the exposure of data and a data breach. And so the sensitivity of the data is going to determine whether or not you need to actually go that next step. So making sure that you're not going to be the person that puts in a claim on the data breach for their cyber insurance policy and they say, yeah, you didn't check this box. You didn't actually do what you said you were going to do to protect the data. We're not paying on your claim. So reading the fine print is really important as well. And of course, it may just be that you're taking responsibility for that sensitive information and going that next step and protecting it as you should, not because you have a mandate telling you you need to. So when we look at encryption and encrypting sensitive data on the IBMI, which is, very often that core server for many of the businesses, the sensitive information is going to be there. So how you're going to protect it on the IBMI is through that encryption. It is one of the many layers of data protection you can add to the IBMI. System configuration is a key component. Data encryption would be your next layer that's really critical. And then virus protection, exit point security, and multi-factor authentication can layer on top of that. But data encryption is really all about protecting the sensitive information from the wrong people being able to see it. And if somebody is able to get a hold of it, what are they going to be able to do with it? Encrypting your valuable information is adding that data protection. So breach data is not going to be useful if it's unreadable. So that's really about being able to control what someone's going to be able to see. And if they do get a hold of it, is it in a readable format? Are they going to be able to do anything with it? If you have a data breach and that data is masked and the user has no visibility to the sensitive portion of it, then there's really not been a critical breach there. Still have some issues, but there's been some protection on the information itself. So what we're able to do with IBMI is use field procedure programs which allow us to encrypt the data at the field level. So rather than taking on older approaches where you're going to have some very complicated configuration and a lot of programming involved, those field procedure programs allow this to be a much simpler process. So rather than using some of the oldest methods, and you got that Enigma machine over there, some of the earliest encryption, we really want to make this process easier. So with field procedures, so what are these going to do for you guys on IBMI and encrypting the data? So it is non-invasive to your databases. So the field procedure is added to that database field and allows you to control how things are going to happen. It's mostly non-invasive to applications. So you're going to have some transparency on that application level where you're not going to have to modify your applications when you add those field procedures. So making it more easily implemented because you're not having to rewrite applications in order to accommodate for the encryption itself. And it's going to give you better protection because it's not going to simply be masking within the application. You need to have data protection regardless of how someone is able to get to your data, not just through the approved application interface. Those field procedures, because they are provided by IBM, are integrated with all OS functions. In other words, this is going to be application agnostic. User uses SQL, if they use display physical file member, if they're pulling that data out of the system into one of those reports that George mentioned, we're going to be checking to see that those field procedure programs are going to check, see who that user is, and that data is going to be masked regardless of how they get at it. So it's really going to give you that ultimate control over the visibility to this data and protecting it while it's at rest on your system. And you're really going to be able to manage that process very easily. Because the field procedures are done at the database level, it is a fairly straightforward process. When those field procedures get called, is going to be on inserts updates and read operations. So whenever someone is putting data into that database, the field procedure program will be called. It will automatically encrypt that data. So no extra steps need to be added, no trigger programs need to be added. As soon as that data is added to the database, when that is inserted and saved, it is going to be automatically encrypted. So when the end users go to read the data, it is going to automatically decode as well at that field procedure program. And it is going to determine what that user is able to see. So allowing that data while it's on the server to be encrypted and be protected, and everything's automated in the middle. IBM actually added these field procedures at v7.r1, so it's been around for quite some time, and it really simplified this process. In order to add and remove field procedures, there's definitely some work involved. And when you add a field procedure, there's going to be an alter table, alter column, and set field procedure program. So some things to consider with that when this is being done is that there can't be any locks on the file when this alter statement runs. So you're going to have a nice quiet time on the system. And you're going to have object alter authority as well as use authority to the field procedure program in order to actually add that field procedure. When you do so, it is going to perform mass encoding or mass encryption of those field values. So consider how many records you have in that database, because it could take quite some time to encrypt each of those fields that you select with that field procedure program. So you may want to consider submitting that to batch. When you're removing a field procedure, of course, again, this is going to require no locks on the file, and you're going to alter table, alter column, as well as do that drop field procedure with that. And then it is going to perform a mass decoding or decryption of those field values again. So again, could take quite some time, and so you might want to consider submitting that to batch as well. So getting those field procedures in place, and it'll take a little bit of planning, and removing them as well if that the need does arise there. Now, with those field procedures in place, there's a number of different things that can happen on the system that are going to actually trigger an encode event. So when is that field procedure going to get called? So any native record level updates and writes, any SQL insert and update statements. There are a handful of CL commands that are also going to trigger the field procedure to do that encryption if you're doing copy file, reorganize physical file member, start EFU. Any query processing is going to trigger the encode events as well. So there's definitely some areas where those field procedures are going to trigger that encryption when that data is added. Decoding those events, so this is your reading of data. This is where things can be leaving the system. That sensitive information is being consumed. So those field procedures are going to be invoked for decoding in very similar ways, where we've got those native record level reads, SQL selects and fetches, query processing, any report writers, right? So taking that data consumed out of that database and into a report that could be emailed off or stored on somebody's cloud document storage solution. So that report writing, that data, when it's written out to that report, is going to trigger that decode event. Any file transfer utilities. So that's going to trigger that field procedure program as well, multiple CL commands. So this data is going to be consumed, but when it is and is read in some form or another through whichever application, those field procedure programs are going to fire and decode the data based on what you have it set up to do. Now, you can, technically, I guess you could encrypt data yourself. This is, custom coded solutions can be really difficult and time consuming. I don't talk to a lot of companies that actually have the luxury of a full development staff that is going to be able to develop their own custom solution. But, there is that potential where you may have that. It is time consuming, and getting projects off the ground quickly is usually better. The longer it takes, the more money you're spending on all of that time and those individuals. IBM's APIs are rather complex, and it does require a lot of research to implement correctly. So there's definitely going to need to be a lot of planning involved and understanding of how those APIs are how are called, and ensuring that they are done correctly, so you don't impact system performance. IBMI is all about that database structure, and speed is important. So you wouldn't want to impact that. You may often have to make some pretty significant application changes in order to make that encryption and decryption of data work properly. So whether it may be changing a database type, expanding the field sizes, modifying those programs to accommodate those database changes and the cipher functions. So there is that potential as well. And the encrypted data can have special characters and may interfere with emulators. So you really have to make a lot of considerations about creating your own solution for this. And of course, you have to also consider managing those data encryption keys. When you're protecting data with those data encryption keys, you have to protect those as well. So it's another level of involvement that may not be anticipated. Audit trails may be non-existent or limited. So you need to ensure that when you are creating your own custom coded solution, that you have taken that into account and how you're going to handle and what you're going to audit. And of course, that does lend to the problem that those programmers, those developers that are creating this custom solution have too much knowledge about the solution, and you lose that separation of duties, especially when we're talking about some of those compliance requirements. Auditors aren't going to appreciate the fact that the fox is guarding the hen house. So we have to consider that and where that is going to potentially impact your level of data protection at that point. So definitely a challenge. So what I would do is actually consider a commercial IBMI encryption solution. So rather than reinventing the wheel or trying to invent a new wheel for yourself, use a wheel that's already there. So commercial solutions are going to already have all of that planning taken care of, and understanding where there's field procedure programs are, how they're called, what the impacts can be, and accommodating for that, and ensuring that they are doing that and using those APIs properly so that it does provide for that streamlined performance, and it does provide the protection at the same time. And being able to farm out and determine when that data is read, who should be able to see it. Remember, that data has been classified. You know that it's restricted. How are you going to ensure that only those authorized users can see that restricted data? So that's where the commercial solution is going to provide you with that ability. Whether you're going to have users who are going to see that fully decrypted version of that data, or if that user only needs to see partial data. So that sensitive information, the last four of a social security number, the first two last four of a credit card number, or payroll, 1099s, whatever that information is, payroll clerk needs to see some of it, but they don't really need someone's entire social security number, but it needs to be in the database. So being able to show enough for it to work for the end user that needs to see it. And then the public, so who's not authorized to see that data at all. So using the commercial solution, you're going to be able to have that flexibility of only showing the view of the data that's appropriate, regardless of how that person is accessing the data. So PowerTech encryption is a tool that is going to provide you with that, and you're going to have a lot of built-in benefits, including the ability to have policy settings. Who's going to be able to manage the product? Who's going to be able to manage the data encryption keys? Who's going to be able to modify the configurations, and having those controls in place built in. Field procedure programs, of course, are going to provide you with that encryption and decryption, that automated encoding and decoding of the data. Key management, the ability to rotate data encryption keys. So a big piece of some of these compliance mandates are that you need to rotate your data encryption keys periodically. So making that process easier is going to come with a commercial solution. managing it yourself can be a huge challenge. And of course, that auditing, making sure that you have visibility to what is happening and alerting when concerning changes have been made, so that you know, in fact, that something has happened. Somebody has made a modification that is going to potentially expose that data you've worked so hard to classify and protect. With PowerTech encryption for IBM from Fortra, you're going to have the global policy settings where you can configure PCI dual control. You're going to have that ability to maintain that separation of duties, integrated key management. It's going to integrate with also with third-party external key managers. So if you already have a data encryption key manager in place, you're going to be able to work with that as well. So you've got some flexibility. And those security controls about managing who can access and manage the data encryption keys, who's going to be able to add encryption or remove encryption. And then, of course, you're going to have a strong encryption algorithms with the AS256 flexibility and the powerful encryption layer. PowerTech encryption for IBM also provides you multiple ways of encrypting that classified data on your system. So with the database or field level encryption, with our field registry entries, you're going to be able to manage those fields and understand which fields have been protected. You've done your inventory, you know where the sensitive data is. Being able to easily manage and encrypt it and manage how it's encrypted and how it's visible to the end users is going to be a very easy, simple process. And I'll show you guys some information here in a minute. But really about being able to encrypt most field types as well. So when you come across those packed numeric, those zoned, alpha, date, time, graphics, you're going to be able to encrypt pretty much most field types. And then regardless of the field sizes as well, so whether they're small or large field sizes. We've also provided the IFS encryption because, as we've talked about, data is not consumed only in its form within the database. That information is taken out of the database and very often built into other file forms. So that data is now in a spreadsheet, or it's in a PDF file report that was generated and it's now stored in the IFS on the IBM. So that data is still sensitive. It still needs to be protected. So you're able to encrypt stream files in the IFS and protecting it there. Third layer of encryption, type of encryption that you're going to get is backup encryption. So you're going to be able to encrypt and save entire libraries as well as selected objects. So allowing you to do those one-offs and save that in that encrypted state so that when you move it, it is protected when it's being transferred. When we look at the tool itself, think of it as an encryption in a box. You've got that full key management, conditional decryption and masking, administration interface. So everything's right there provided for you to just drop it in. It's about the rapid deployment. So we talked about, creating your own custom solutions. This is a long-term commitment and it can take quite some time. So really being able to deploy this rapidly, you're going to be getting those benefits as quickly as possible. Because it's minimal invasion, you're not going to have to be making those application changes and no coding requirements. So really being able to implement it quickly. So we'll take a quick peek here at really what it looks like within the tool to be able to get that encryption in place. So you're going to be able to dive into the library level, identify the files that have that sensitive data in it that's been classified, and then drill down into the file itself, see all of the fields, determine and add that encryption registry entry right here. So being able to configure based on the the field type, where that field is and what file it is in, we're going to be able to determine, you'll be able to add the specific encryption algorithm as well as the encryption mode. So ensuring that you've selected the level of encryption that meets best for your requirements. You're going to be able to manage the users who have visibility to that full view of the data, as well as the partial masked view of the data with our authorization list, to be able to control and easily add and remove users based on the user profile or their group profile. So being able to cover large numbers of users to have that visibility for maybe that partial masking. And the masking itself, you've got a lot of flexibility as well, because it's not a one size fits all. You're going to have that ability to show specific digits on the left, digits on the right, and then mask the data with what you see appropriate. So whether it's a hashtag, an asterisk, or maybe all zeros or all nines, you'll be able to select the masking that makes the most sense for your environment. So implementing it is very, very quick, very easy process, and is going to give you that that control very quickly. All right, I'm going to give you a quick live demo of this, just so you can understand that once you've added that that field encryption, you're going to have that visibility regardless of how the user is getting at that data. And that's really what's important, is that as I mentioned before, the application masking is only beneficial if the user's using the application. So you can see here, I've got a profile called Sandi Moore, and I don't have visibility to all of that information. So credit card number, the last four and the first two only, that's appropriate for this particular profile. Social security number, completely masked. So protecting that data, that's in my application. What happens when I actually go into another interface? So SQL, select the data, trying to use a little bit of a backdoor here. I'm going to see that same version of the data, right? So making sure that when I'm consuming the data in another way, I'm still going to be honoring that decryption is only going to give me what I've been authorized to see. We can go so far as to look at what those data transfers look like. So someone's pulling the data off the system. Now, mind you, this is still hopefully within your environment, but this needs to be considered as well. So how is that user going to see that data when it is leaving the system? So again, mask data. They only get to see what we're authorizing them to see. It has left the server. It's now on my workstation, but I still have that authorized view only. I'm not going to be able to find a backdoor to get to that data. Even a query here, if you're doing a select, pulling it in this way with that SQL script, that data is still in its form that is authorized for my profile. So really just takes it to that point of ensuring that we're controlling that access regardless of how someone is able to get to the data. All right. Couple things to think about, compliance requirements, right? So when you're looking at an encryption solution, what should be driving your decisions? So what are your compliance requirements, if you have any, if it's an internal policy, or if it's another entity telling you what you need to do? Consider the strength of the encryption method you've selected. What does that audit trail look like? Are you going to be able to use it? And is it going to give you enough information? How long is it going to take to implement the solution that you're looking at? And how easy is it to use? All of those things should be factored into your approach in getting to that data encryption and protecting the sensitive information. Part of our best of breed PowerTech security solutions, native encryption for IBM I, of course, is what we've introduced you here today. There's many layers to security. This is just one of those pieces, one of those layers that sits right there in the middle, ensuring that you've got the data at rest protected. Now, I do encourage people to assess the risk of a security incident, because these core servers are usually have the most valuable information for a company and are the least guarded. And the assumption is that the system's secure. But what we've seen year over year with our State of IBM I security study based on our IBM I security scans is that these systems are not well guarded. So you can actually use our security scan. It's a free tool, so just let us know if it's something you're interested in. It'll give you 7 points of data to look at, giving you some. We'll also provide you with a free hour where we'll actually walk through it with you, explain what we were looking for, why you should be concerned about it, so that you can actually see on your server what it looks like. How concerned should you be? So definitely something that can be helpful. I do encourage customers to start with that so you know what you're up against. And, you know, security is all about those layers. It's all about understanding what's going on. If you don't understand where you're at now, you can't plan for the future to get to that secure point. All right. So I think we are right up there at the end of the time, George. I know I talked for longer than I planned, so I don't think we have time for answering the questions today. But please, if you do still have some questions, drop them into the Q&A panel, and we'll be following up with you. Whether you have questions about data classification, George's wealth of knowledge, and he's going to have some good information for you. Definitely a road to travel down there, as well as if you have any questions about encryption, we're happy to help.
Exactly. Thanks, Sandi, and thanks, folks, for listening in this afternoon.
Yeah, really appreciate you guys. All right, George, take care. Thank you, everybody. Please reach out if you do have any questions.